Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to talk about HTTP requests in n8n. So as we all know, n8n is a very powerful tool for automation, especially with AI agents for automation. So literally you can automate everything in n8n. But personally, I think if you want to make use of n8n to the max level, then we need to understand how HTTP requests work. Because in n8n, we are going to contact several external services via something called HTTP requests. For example, an OpenAI agent or Google Drive service or Google Sheet service. So all those are done via HTTP requests. So it's good to understand what HTTP request is and how we can use it. Right, so let's dive in. First of all, we need to understand what HTTP request is. So what is the concept of HTTP request? So you can understand this HTTP request is a message sent by a client to a server to request data or perform an action. So in this case, the client is your n8n workflow, and the server is, let's say, OpenAI service or Google Drive, Google Sheets service. So those are the servers. And HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, which is the foundation for data communication on the web. And when you are working with HTTP requests in n8n, then these are the four methods that you need to care about because they are quite common and popular. Right, so the very first one is called the GET request. So with the GET request, you can retrieve data. You can request to get or retrieve data from the server. And then the second type is called the PUT request, which is used to update or edit resource or data on the server. And then the third one is called the POST request, which is used to create a new piece of information or data on the server. And the final one is called delete request. So delete request is normally used to delete a resource or piece of data on the server. So these are the four common methods of HTTP requests that you will probably use within your n8n workflow. Right, so when you are working with HTTP requests, sometimes when you read documentations, you might come across something called an endpoint. So what is an endpoint? An endpoint is a specific URL or an address of a service so that you can access to that web service and retrieve or send, manipulate data. So let's have a look at an example here. So we have this URL, which is https api.example.com/v1/users/123. So this is an endpoint. Right, so what does this endpoint include? So it has first of all the base URL, which is the protocol and the domain name, which is api.example.com. And we have the path, which consists of the API version. So this can be optional. So it means that if you're working with an API and in the documentation there's no such API version, then you're fine. We don't need to have it. It depends on the documentation of the API you're working with. Right, and then the last part we have the users /123. So users here indicates that you are accessing a resource named user on the server, and 123 here is called a path parameter, which we'll talk about later on, to indicate which resource in the user's big resource that you are accessing to. Right, and this is an endpoint. What you can imagine, an endpoint is a door on entrance for you to access a resource, to get the resource or manipulate the resource. Right, so let's move on to the parameters of HTTP requests. So what are parameters? So these are the data that can be sent together with your HTTP request so that the server can process your request accordingly. So actually there are three types of parameters in HTTP request. The first one is called query parameters. The second one is called path parameters, and the third one is called body parameters. So let's have a look into detailed example of what these are. So first of all, we have the path parameters. So path parameters, if you have a look into this URL, this is what you see. You see 42, you see 70. So these are the path parameters. So what are they? So path parameters are the values indicate or defined by the user, and these values are integrated into the URL, directly into the URL. So if you look into this URL, you can potentially determine that, okay, so this is an endpoint pointing the user's resource and potentially the owner's resource, and the users with the identifier of 42 and the owners with the identifier of 7. So 42 and 7 are defined by you, or particularly the users, in order to tell the server that, okay, I want to access this resource with this ID or this identifier. Right, so those are the path parameters because they are integrated directly into the URL of the URL, the endpoint's URL. And we have the second parameters, which is the query parameters. So in the query parameters, they are slightly different from the path parameters, but they are also included into the URL of the request. So let's have a look at this one. So as you can see, we have an endpoint, which is the search endpoint. But if you notice, you can see there's a question mark here, and the question mark indicates that everything after it is a query parameter. So for example, if you look into this URL, you can see there are two query parameters. The first one is called queue, and it has a value of test, and the second one is page with the value of 1. And queue and page parameters can be connected, can be changed together using the ampersand. So if you have more query parameters, you can connect them using the ampersand here. Right, so generally the query parameters follow by the question mark, and they are connected using the ampersand. And similar to the path parameters, they are also shown in the URL of the request or the endpoint. Right, so now let's talk about the final type of the request, the final type of the parameters, which is body parameters. Right, so body parameters are different from the other two because they do not show in the URL or in the endpoint of the request, because they are attached to the body of the request. So normally body parameters are used in post or put request because they consist of data that need to be sent and processed by the server. And a common use case of body parameters are when you log in to a service and you need to send your email or your password to service, and path parameters and query parameters are not suitable because you're exposing the username and passwords in the URL, which is not good. So you need to use body parameters in order to attach those values into the body of the request. Cool, so it's me explaining all of these parameters, endpoints, and HTTP requests. So now let's dive into n8n to see how we can use those things in n8n. Right, let me switch to my n8n and we can see. So let's demonstrate how we can use different type of HTTP requests. First of all, I'm going to show you an API, an open source API that I like to practice with. Right, so that's called Pokemon API because I like playing Pokemon. So things about Pokemon basically spark an interest in me. So this is very nice API to me because it's open source, it's free, and this documentation is very good as well. So let's say I have a very nice documentation here in this page, and then if I want to retrieve a Pokemon, then I can select this Pokemon here, and as you can see here in this page, so this is a description, and you see the word endpoint here. So it means that there's a URL pointing to somewhere on the server that can basically retrieve the information about the Pokemon that you need. Right, so let's say how we can do it. First of all, we can see this one. This is the URL or the endpoint, right? And what is this one? This is the method of this HTTP request, which is a get method. So let's say if we want to retrieve or get a Pokemon on this Poke API server, then the first thing we need to do in n8n is basically click on the plus here and we type HTTP request. Right, so HTTP request, as we understand, this is a get request, and we set get request. As you can see here, there are multiple methods here, but previously I only mentioned get, post, put, and delete because they are the commonly used in many scenarios. Right, and how about the URL? The URL here, we can just simply copy this URL and put it here. Right, as you can see here, there's a v2 here, which is the API version, which means we are working with API version number 2 of this API. Right, so as you can see, this ID name in the curly braces, this indicates this is a path parameter because first of all, it is not following by a question mark. It's indicated and it's integrated into the URL. So it's a path parameter. Right, so I don't know the ID of the Pokemon I want to get because obviously I don't have access to the database, but I say ID or name, so I can use the name of the Pokemon. For example, I want to retrieve information about a Pikachu. Let's say I replace this part with Pikachu. And as you can see, here, this is my complete URL. Right, and in here, in this endpoint, there's no authentication because it doesn't say anywhere. Because if there is an authentication, you will see something like authorization and there's a header in there. But in this case, there's no such authentication required. So in the authentication part of n8n, we leave as none. Right, and we don't send any data, we don't query any parameters because we don't see anything in here. And we don't send any body parameters either because we are not manipulating the data. Right, so let's say I will execute my workflow. Cool, so my workflow has been executed successfully. So now let's have a look. We have retrieved information about our Pikachu. So let's have a look what our Pikachu has. There are a lot of things here. That has been queried. You see, it's a very long JSON object queried from the Poke API server. But it works because we have successfully queried this data. That's very nice. Okay, so that is how a GET request works. And how about POST and PUT request? So in this Poke API, there's no way for you to create a new Pokemon because you are not allowed to do so. So you cannot send a POST, a PUT, or delete request because you are manipulating data, so they don't allow you to do so. Right, so I'm going to show you somewhere else that can potentially help you with understanding POST, PUT, and delete request work. So for example, if you want to create a sheet, Google Sheets, then we go to the Google Sheets node here, and we can see we have create spreadsheet, we have delete spreadsheet. In this node, it has been abstractified for you, so you don't see what is happening behind the scene. But actually, when creating a spreadsheet, you're sending a POST request to the Google Sheets service in order to create a document. So you're not seeing what's happening here. But let's say if you want to create a Google form, and we try to search for Google form, which is not in here. So what do? We will go to Google Forms API documentation, which you can search on Google or just type in this URL. Right, and in my previous video, I also covered how to create Google Forms using our agent automation in order to create Google Form, get responses, and put into a spreadsheet. So please check it out in my previous video, and I'll put the link down in the pinned comment. Right, and let's say I want to create a form using this Google Forms API, and I go to this URL and I go to Forms Create, and as you can see, we have the HTTP request here, and this is the URL we need to send the request to, and you see this is the POST request. So we're going to do this by creating another HTTP request node. Right, and I'm going to change this node into create form. Right, and the method here, I'm going to change it to a POST request. And then, what is the URL? I'm going to copy this URL. And put it here. Right. And as you can see, this URL, we don't have any path parameters or query parameters we need to send. Parameters, if you want to send query parameters as unpublished, you can do it. And how you do it, you add a question mark. And then what is the name of this query parameters? Unpublished. And it's a Boolean, which means its value can be either true or false. But I don't need it for now. So I'm not gonna do it. Right, and then what else do I do? I'm gonna need the request body because I'm creating a new form. I need to tell the service what data it needs in order to create a new form for me, for example, form title. And it says request body. Request body contains an instance of form. So I'm going to go to form. And as you can see, we see something like this. So I'm going to copy the whole thing. Just copy this object. And I'm going to go back to my n8n. And as you can see, we are sending a body parameter. So I'm going to toggle this, send body. And this is a JSON object. As you can see, this is a JSON object because it's a JSON representation. So to copy that, and instead of saying using the fields below, I'm going to say using JSON. And I'm going to open this, paste this in, right. And if you read further down here, you can see form ID is output only. Because we are creating a form, we don't know the ID yet. So we will delete this one. And based on my research, Google Forms, when creating a new form, only accepts the title. So we don't need all of these, which means you cannot create questions and everything at the same time of creating a form. You are creating a blank form with a title. And in here, the info object, if I want to see what is in here, it's in the info object, it has title, document title, and description. So we only allowed to have these two things. So I'm going to copy those and paste in here. So we have title, which is a string. So I'm going to say this is my new form. And also the document title is this is my new form. Right. So that is our JSON body. So now let's try to send this request to see if it works or not. So I'm going to execute this step. It doesn't work because if you look into here, what does it say? It says authorization failed because I haven't put in any credentials. Because as I said, you are manipulating the data. So it means you need to have a credentials to the server in order to manipulate the data. Right, so because we have authentication is none here, so that's why it doesn't work. So I'm going to say we're going to use predefined credential type. I'm going to say Google Drive OAuth here. And we have Google Drive OAuth 2 API, which I connected to my account previously. Right, so I have my authorization integrated in my request. It's authentication, and I have the body of the data. Right, so now let's execute this one and see if it works. So now it works. As you can see, we have our form ID returned, which is here, and we have document title, and we have the title of the form, and so on. Right, so let's see if our form was actually created or not. So I'm going to go to my Google and go to Drive. And as you can see here, I have a new form called This is my new form. And we have This is my new form here. We have no questions, we have no responses. It's just a blank form with a title and document title. So by doing that, we have sent a post request to Google Forms server in order to create a new form in our Google Drive. So that's how it works. So as you can see, if something is not available in n8n as a pre-built node, for example Google Forms, then you can always go to the documentation of that API, read the documentation to see what the endpoint to send to, and what is the method of the HTTP request, what data needs to be sent, so you can create your custom node that manipulates data in your own way. You don't have to rely on a pre-built n8n node. So I hope this tutorial about HTTP requests helps you understand how the HTTP requests work and how you can use them in n8n. Thank you very much, and if you like the video, please give it a like and a thumbs up, and also please consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you very much.